So with some solid points nerfs handed out to Death Guard Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights, let's take a look at the 40k tournaments using the new points and which armies have risen up to be doing well in their place. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I was interested to take a look at what was doing well out there in the Warhammer 40k meta, now that Games Workshop has hit perhaps the strongest three factions with some solid nerfs in the updates last week. Over the past couple of months, Death Guard, Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights have been doing rather monstrously well towards the top end of Warhammer 40k, massively high win rates and a vast amount of event wins on top of that, and due to that Games Workshop eventually pulled a slightly early emergency balance nerf, raising points for those factions alongside the Leagues of Votann points going live. As a result, the tournaments that were happening that weekend basically had a choice whether or not they'd use the new points or the older points. As usual, the majority didn't choose to use the updated things in the exact same weekend, particularly for big events where people might have travelled a long way and might not be able to repack their models and things. They generally don't tend to. Though even despite that factor, really quite a lot of medium-sized grand tournaments just decided to shift directly into the new points. I have a feeling that at least the majority of players would happily play with the newest points values, particularly with Death Guard and Knights being so consistently strong for so long. I was certainly interested to see what was doing well at those events though. So for this one I thought we'd look through a whole bunch of tournaments that appear to have used the new points, take a look at the armies that went undefeated and the ones that just took one defeat, so basically a rough and ready metric of which armies seem to be doing well in the meta after the nerfs, see if Death Guard and Knights are still cropping up in the same numbers, and take a look at a few of the event winners, just a few examples of some armies that seem to have done well after the updates. Obviously it's super early days yet, not a lot of data, and the actual lists are just one example of what one player has done well with, but still might be interesting to take a look at some of the strongest lists in 40k's future. Starting out, it looks like the biggest event that used the new points was this Warzone Tucker Brewing one, a 60-player grand tournament, and it feels like this, as with the Vesta events out there, really does seem to have a good mix of 40k factions on show. Looks like Space Wolves with the Saga of the Beast Slayer won that event, with Blood Angels, Angelic Inheritors going undefeated as well. We'll take a look at those lists in just a second, but beyond that there's Emperor's Children, the Astra Militarum, Adeptus Custodes, Necrons, World Eaters, Genes to the Cult, Death Guard, Thousand Sons and Tyranids there. So really quite a good mix of 40k factions on show. Definitely slanted towards the ones that I'd expect to either do well at tournaments or be kind of upper mid in general. This one's the Saga of the Beast Slayer list. To my knowledge, I believe it's the first grand tournament win for the new Space Wolves. The faction seems to have had good win rates and a vast amount of high placing armies, but no one had had the combination of skill and good fortune to actually outright win an event yet, even if it did seem kind of inevitable. It looks like a player called Zeb Martin has gone first at this big tournament, going undefeated as well. That's using the popular Saga of the Beast Slayer detachment. That's been by far the most successful out of the recent codex. Army-wide lethal hits against characters, monsters and vehicles is already a pretty great start, and then the stratagems on top of that are really good as well. A nice easy +1 to wound one. There's a big 6 inches reactive move one and a return to reserves. Several other useful stratagems, and the most popular enhancement tends to be the Wolf Touched one, which allows a character to join a Wolf and Infantry unit. Usually that tends to be quite a good combo with the Hammer and Shield Wolfen, though weirdly enough it seems to be used here on a lone Wolfguard battle leader. I guess he might be running with some of the Wolfguard head takers, and maybe allow them a shorter charge by ranging 2 inches out the front of the unit. It does boost his movement characteristics slightly. In any case, going through the list more generally, it looks like there's a core of Terminators joined by Ayak Rockfist and Logan Grimnar. They each have a unit of the durable Wolfguard Terminators with the Storm Shields. Logan can allow a unit to deep strike turn 1 and has one of the command point debuff auras. Ayak's just a really fighty hero. And then there's two other big mainline threats, Ragnar Blackmane and the Wolfguard Battle Leader, each of which seems to be joining a Wolfguard Head Taker unit, one unit of 6 and one of 3. Ragnar's unit gets to advance and charge. The Battle Leader one gets some boosted melee damage. It looks like 2 out of those big chunky melee threats are Hitching Rides and Land Raiders. Maybe not so very common to see regular Land Raiders on the board, though I guess it can certainly deliver stuff to melee. I guess Logan Grimnar would teleport his own squad in. Technically the others could all fit in the Land Raiders if they want to, but I guess at least 2 out of the 3 of them would. Kind of interesting to see that. I suppose they do provide a bit of heavy firepower and will be very safe places to charge out of. I feel like you more commonly see Impulsors with the head takers though. Otherwise, there's some tanky skirmishing Thunderwolves. Hard to go wrong with a unit of them for just 100 points with their stats. There's 2 Fenrisian Wolf squads, one squad of 5 and another squad of 3 of them broken off the head takers. Some intercessors for sticky objectives, some scouts with combat knives, a Gladiator Reaper for some anti-horde apparently, and a combi weapon for some skirmishing and objective stuff. Maybe the Space Wolves will be rising up a bit in an era where there aren't quite so many Knights and Death Guard around. Another army that might potentially do that could be the Blood Angels. This Angelic Inheritors list was run by Noah Neundorfer, and again went undefeated, though did have one draw. Blood Angels look like on paper they might be having a good time if the Knights aren't quite so prevalent. It did seem like their win rates into both Imperial and Chaos Knights seem to be unusually low, several of their damage profiles being fairly savage, but without some big buffs going in as well, might have struggled to one round something like a big 26 wound Titanic Knight, maybe compared with some elite infantry. There's more people that play Liberator Assault Group than Angelic Inheritors, but that one also seems to be having a good time. It's the one with the character rerolls and some pretty powerful stratagems for character-led units, things like turning off shooting, returning to reserve, and big damage boosts and more. As you'd expect, this one goes very heavy on the characters. There's 3 small units of Sanguinary Guard, each led by a character, Dante and then 2 jump captains. All of those can be enormously threatening and use all the good stuff from the detachment. There's the 2 fighty lone operatives with fights first, can both be a big pain to deal with and are quite good at bullying mid-sized units. There's 6 Inceptors with a close range deep strike and some plasma fire. They potentially could be an interesting one for jumping back into reserve. Some Infiltrators to lock down the backfield and stop enemy deep strikers. Intercessors for some sticky objectives. A combi weapon lieutenant for skirmishing and ordained sacrifice to get him up when he dies to make him extra hard to remove. And a pair of Vindicators for some tough heavy anti-tank. Maybe one of the most interesting things I've not seen a lot is an Apothecary joining a Desolation squad. I guess that'd give you some fairly punchy ignores line of sight firepower. He gets to re-roll hit rolls of 1 and wound rolls of 1 with them. And for 1 CP you could give them sustained hits 1 as well. It certainly pays off for the points investment on a 200 point unit. They do become a lot more efficient between baked in re-rolls and the option for some sustained hits on the target. Overall certainly feels like an interesting and very tricky list to engage. Several things that you're probably going to struggle to get first strike on, and no short supply of big punchy units that can jump out and hit you very hard. Certainly looks like an army that would need some skill to play though. Several squads are pretty fragile, and there's not a huge amount of things to grab objectives with. Before we move on to some other tournaments and what did well in them, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor Enlighter Creative, a wargame and terrain supplies company with their first couple of creations. Some fairly fun looking die cut wood terrain and multiple battle mats marked out with the deployment zones. They ship free within the USA, UK and Canada, and there'll be links below. For a terrain set, that one costs $160 or £120 for a full board worth of 40k terrain. It's called the Ashfall Citadel. The terrain's made of die cut wood coming on these boards and pop out pretty easily. I've assembled a set of this myself and it goes together without glue really quite handily. And I must admit I was genuinely very impressed with the ratio of being really easy to assemble and looking pretty good when it was on the table. In the set you basically get 4 of the big ruins, 6 of the smaller ones, plus some armoured containers, not too bad for a full board of terrain. Their other major offering is their Warzone terrain mats, the right size for 2,000 point games, usually $80 or £62 currently, and made of synthetic leather with the deployment zones all marked out on them. They've got a few different designs of those, including this Bastion one, and one without the deployment zones that just comes in a 1-inch grid for other game systems. The idea with the deployment zones is that they can hopefully help set things up faster and get games off quicker. They also have a kill team size one as well, aimed for that game mode or boarding actions. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video, and feel free to check them out, links down in the video description. Moving on to the next tournament, and a 30-player grand tournament called Beat the Heat GT. That was won by Tau, or more specifically Kroot with the Hunting Pack, and then beyond that, the list that just took the one loss were Genestealer Cult and 2 sets of Chaos Marines with Pact-Bound Zealots and Creations of Bile. No Renegade Raiders there apparently. Not too surprised to see Genestealer Cults doing well as well, but the high placing list wasn't with the host of Ascension it would seem. Kroot Hunting Pack are pretty cool to see in the mix. It does seem that as a detachment its win rates are doing okay recently, and the list that was used was played by Randy Brigham, who also seems to have won at least one other tournament with the Kroot as well. This one's the detachment that gives you 5+ invulnerable saves at range and damage buffs to the Kroot, the option to respawn some carnivores, and options to turn off shooting and damage buffs for rampagers, who Games Workshop seem to have decreased the points cost on pretty consistently recently, and not too surprising to see 3 big units of 6 of them here as the main muscle that can deal with some big targets. Beyond that, there's also 3 units of 3 Krootox Riders, so a pretty massive amount of sheer wounds there with invulnerable saves at range. They still might struggle against the toughest targets, but they should be able to maul anything that's going to fear volume attacks. There's 80 carnivores total, 2 sets of 20 and 4 of 10. I guess the 20 would have the Flesh Shapers with, giving them a bit more raw might, maybe one with a War Shaper in as well. And there's a Trail Shaper too with Nomadic Hunter. Not sure if he joins the Carnivores or some of the Farstalkers. There's 2 units of those which can start on the mid board and potentially do some redeploying with the Trail Shaper if it makes sense. 3 units of Kroot hounds, which could be some nice expendable interference squads and still have OC with Kroot characters, and then 2 lone spears, which can have some good utility use and also mark targets with their long guns to allow some better focal damage on one thing. Looks like it's an army with some pretty serious board control and it'll probably be a big grind to fight through. Not spectacular amounts of damage, but at the same time, if the Rampagers get a charge on something, it is likely to take quite a bit. Again, certainly feels like one of the army lists that's going to do far better in the hands of someone who knows the game really well. Next up, we've got one called Geekfest Summer Heat. This one's a 42-player grand tournament. The undefeated list for this one were Black Templars Gladius that won the event, and then Thousand Sons Grand Coven placing second, and then a good mix of other things: Dark Angels, World Eaters, Imperial Knights, Death Guard, and Astra Militarum. Still some okay representation for the nerfed armies on the top tables here, I suppose. Black Templars are certainly looking pretty strong out the gate, winning 2 grand tournaments last week and another one this week. It seems like they're fairly exclusively using Gladius Task Force to make that happen. It just seems to support their melee units a good amount better than their others do. Advance and charge maybe being the biggest thing, reactive moves, fights on death, the extra AP and melee stratagem for the assault doctrine and a few more are all solid value adds. It's generally the Sword Brethren combos that tends to have been carrying the list. There's 3 units of 5 here, 2 of them joined by Marshall and Castellan, so re-rolling hit rolls and then critical hits on a 5+. So that means that you just get a spectacular amount of auto wounds before you've even got your boosted wound rolls off. And then the last one's led by a combination of Helbrecht and a Castellan. Helbrecht's +1 attack and strength is also pretty excellent. Then there's an Emperor's Champion with the Honor Vehement for some extra attacks. It seems that he's joining an Assault Intercessor squad, and again they're just a fantastically murderous melee damage piece. +1 to wound and the potential for full wound rerolls means that just about everything in the game has got to worry about that black sword. Then to deliver them into battle, there's a Land Raider Redeemer for some move, drop and charge for a unit or 2. You could fit 2 squads in there if you wanted. And then there's 2 of the remarkably threatening Templar Repulsor Executioners with the extra multi-melter and the hit rolls built in. Again, they can be a good staging post for any of those units. Finally, to round off, there's some Space Marine support units, some infiltrating scouts, some screening infiltrators, and a combi weapon lieutenant for the board control and movement shenanigans. Overall, looks like a very scary list. There's very little in the game that's going to stand up well to those Black Templar damage blocks going into them. Second at that tournament is a Thousand Sons Grand Coven list by Darren Thomas. Thousand Sons also seem like they're going to be one of the armies that are going to be most threatening in the post-nerf world for the Death Guard and the Knights. They're doing pretty great already. I seem to have gone undefeated at a couple of the events. Their core rules are really strong, with some big shooting rerolls on offer, and some Doom Bolts and other psychic trickery. Grand Coven boost the psychic damage that can be spat out of their characters. Magnus the Red being good for the blanket damage and the big reroll stratagem potentially. Having access to reroll psychic tests is nice, and this one also has some great enhancements. The Vortex of Attack for some very nice psychic damage given to a Winged Demon Prince here, and the Umbrellific Crystal for teleporting squads around the board. There's one with a Sorcerer here. Overall, we've got 3 units of 5 Rubric Marines, looks like 2 with Sorcerers and 1 with an Infernal Master, Magnus the Red himself, the Winged Demon Prince, and then interestingly enough, 1 great big unit of Scarab Occult Terminators along with a Terminator Sorcerer. Really fun to see them on the board. They are an enormous investment, big damage unit that probably needs to be played very carefully, and their scary abilities not squandered. It's rare that I've seen them used outside the Rubricae phalanx. Then there's a very good amount of Zangor support, 3 units of 10 of the on-foot ones with the Scout and Return to Reserves, and then 2 units of the very efficient Enlightened with Great Bows. A really good combo of fast moving and surprisingly good damage for their points investment. Next up, there's a 42-player grand tournament called the 6++ GT South, and it looks like the undefeated list there with Thousand Sons and Chaos Demons. Then for the ones taking just the 1 loss, there's some Grey Knights with their Wartbane Task Force, a Space Wolves Gladius, a Blood Angels Liberator Assault Group, with some Imperial Knights once again, and Emperor's Children with Coterie of the Conceited. Chaos Demons did seem to have dropped off a little bit over the past few weeks, not quite as prominent before the last balance update maybe. Demon Incursion itself seems to be going really strong in the stats though. Close range deep strike and charge is a really big advantage, never mind all the other stuff. That list used Be'lakor, a great unclean one with the Endless Gift, a Lord of Change with the Everstave, both Rotagus and Scarbrand, and some objective support, as ever very focused on the greater demons. For the event winning Thousand Sons though, it was this list by an Alex Fowler. Again, all big psychic damage and shenanigans, and this one using Grand Coven once more. Several similar sort of beats with this one. 4 units of Rubric Marines rather than 5, slightly more enlightened, slightly less Zangors, and this one makes room for a couple of the scary general purpose threats that are the Mutalith Vortex Beast, a Chaos Rhino to buff some psychic damage when your rubrics pile out of it, and a Sorcerer on disc with the Incandeum Relic, allowing you a second Doom Bolt once per game. Still certainly early days yet of course, but certainly looks like Thousand Sons could be one of the armies to beat going forward. Then finally, to round up a few other ones, here's 3 more tournaments of 30 players or less. There's a Southeast Siege tournament that was won by Leagues of Votann, with Eldari, Subterranean Tyranids and Black Templars placing next in that. One called Hyper 364, that one was won by Eldari Aspect Host, with Guard being the runner-up going 4-1 there. And then one called Tronderdome 3, where Taran Drukari took the undefeated slots, and then Space Wolves, Eldari and Necrons following along after that. I was interested to take a look at the Leagues of Votann army, given that they've just had their codex come out. This one was used by Dan Ahern to go 5-0 undefeated and win a 27-player grand tournament. I'm not 100% sure if it was the old Leagues of Votann codex or the new one. The detachment is listed as the old, but the points as the new. I guess it might have been a pre-codex Leagues of Votann list, just judging by the way that the points would have worked if it was old. And also just the general setup of it looks more like pre-codex than post. In any case, there's an Ironhair champion leading the way. 3 big units of 10 Chthonian Berserks hidden inside Hecaton land fortresses, it would seem. A huge amount of Hernkin Pioneers with some big autocannon threat, and a Sagittor splitting a Hearthkin Warrior squad in 2 for some efficient objective grabbing. Will certainly be interesting to see what happens when the Leagues of Votann hit the tournament scene in earnest. I guess we'll get a few people using their new codex in next weekend's events. Overall, at least in these first events, it looks like there's a pretty good mix of factions taking top spots here. It certainly seems that from initial impressions, Games Workshop's nerfs have been pretty effective in stopping Death Guard and Knights having quite such overrepresentation on the top tables. I was interested to see if it changed anyone's thinking on which armies they'd be playing. Seems that across these events there were around about 18 Death Guard lists taken, 7 Imperial Knights and 10 Chaos Knights, and comparing their Grand Tournament play rates to what that was before looks kind of similar on the Death Guard point of view, though both sets of Knights weren't played quite as much, at least across this sample. It certainly doesn't look like they were having quite as good a time of it in terms of army performance. Seems like there were only 2 Death Guard players going 4 or 1 and better in these events, so still there but not exactly excessive given there were 18 players. The Imperial Knights maybe did better as a ratio. It doesn't look like any of the Chaos Knights players were able to make those top tables. I guess we'll see how they do from here. I still guess they probably will have enough strength to compete, though we'll see. Otherwise though, just taking a look at the factions that managed to go 4-1 undefeated or better, it's a pretty good spread of lots of factions out there in Warhammer 40k. Taking 3 of those placings, we've got Thousand Sons, the Guard, Space Wolves and Eldari. I feel like Astra Militarum might be punching up a little bit there compared with what they often tend to. No big surprises for the Thousand Sons, Space Wolves or Eldari though. And then loads of factions getting 2 placings: World Eaters, Genestealer Cult, Death Guard, Chaos Marines, Blood Angels, Imperial Knights, Emperor's Children, Necrons, Tyranids, Tau and Black Templars. Maybe some of the more notable ones of those being the ones that didn't have such high play rates. Black Templars and Genestealer Cults both seem to be doing rather well. I'm certainly not too surprised to see Blood Angels and Subterranean Assault Tyranids in the mix as well. The majority of these factions did feel like they were on the sort of upper mid rank of 40k or higher anyway. Maybe an interesting enough early snapshot of how things are doing, but I'd certainly say that it looks solidly more balanced than it was in the Death Guard and Knight meta. In any case, I'll look forward to hearing your thoughts. What do you make of some of the initial results, and which armies would you expect to be doing well from here? I'll leave that one there for this one though. As mentioned, a big thank you to Lighter Creative for sponsoring the video. If you'd have any interest in a pre-painted Warhammer 40k terrain set or one of their 40k deployment and battle zone maps, feel free to check them out, link down in the video description. If you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel and the videos I make, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.